Okay, welcome back.
To another episode of Moments of Solace. Okay, you want to tell us what today's topic is?
Yes, I think we are going to be talking about grooming for marriage in our culture, in South Asian cultures.
Oh, so how we prep.
Yes, essentially, like how you prep people like going into marriage, right? Obviously, times have changed, but there's still some things that happen to vast majority of people. Not everybody is, liberal in that thought process. I think the one thing that I would love to hear your insight on is, women are when women are growing up, they're taught, or that their in-laws are going to be villains,
Okay.
and they'll always teach them your experiences. They'll deflect, right? Things that they've experienced in their life, they'll say that it might happen to you as well. So
Okay.
be careful. I don't want to know
Careful.
I want to know if guys get that also. Do guys hear from their mothers or their fathers when you get married, your mother-in-law is going to be a witch. Does that even happen?
I mean, I can't speak for all men, right? I think I can say for myself, my parents. So my dad used to tell me, he was like, you're more than likely your wife will have been told that she needs to command the house and essentially push everybody else out, right? And he was like, and he was saying it in this way of and I'm not remembering all the right words, but essentially it was this idea of sort of to what you were saying, right? Is that your wife is going to come in and she's going to pick a fight and she's going to sort of assert her dominance, and her mother-in-law or your mother-in-law and all that stuff. And he was like, no matter what happens, always love her and love her family, and don't let that ruin your relationship. It was this thing of our culture has been backwards for certain things, but don't let it dictate your relationship.
Okay.
Right. But I think the other thing is that for men, I don't even know if I said that correctly, by the way. I hope people can sort of read between lines of what I'm trying to say.
Probably.
But I think the other thing is that I don't think men are necessarily trained for marriage, but because of our culture, a lot of men think particularly those who are to the right of the middle, right? Of the sense of your wife, you own your wife, right? That's the far right is you own your wife, and then if you work towards the middle is you're still sort of she must listen to me, she must obey me, right? So I don't think men are taught to be they're not taught that, right? But I think it's almost culturally imbued in a lot of men of oh, I told you to do this, so you must do this.
So when I grew up, the people that I was around, and there was a lot of things that were said and were done, and so my mom's experiences were not the bestest when it came to dealing with the in-laws. And I remember her just always telling me, she would always remind me that blood is always thicker than water. And she would say it in the sense when you get married, you'll always be an outsider. You'll never be taken in as your actual daughter. When people can say that you're their daughter, but you won't be their daughter. And at some point in your life, they will turn on you or and it's but I'm not saying that because she thought that way about you guys, right? This was more so about
a general life experience.
And then she would kind of tell me. And I remember when we were getting married, our story's a little something else. But when we were getting married, given the circumstances at that time, my mom was just because you're getting married under these circumstances, for those that are new and that don't know, Bill and I were long distance for for some time, and like my parents had refused to like actually meet him and be, approve of him for me to get married. So there was like a whole different thing, and maybe we'll cover that one day. But for now, it's just like, she would tell me like, because you're getting married in these circumstances, they will come back to you one day and they will tell you that, you know, they will pretty much bring it up and hold it over your head. So you will like not have your freedom. You will not, you'll be tamed and you'll have to make a lot of compromise and sacrifices. And this is just based off of her own experience. And I remember just telling her, I was like, Mom, I don't want you to tell me these things. Even if it's going to happen to me, and if it does happen to me, God forbid, like, I want to be the one that figures out how to navigate through that. Right? And I think that came more so with my understanding with you and our communication. Right? We had an open line of communication always, and we knew that we were going to protect each other no matter what. So I remember telling my mom, I was like, Mom, don't paint a picture in my head and already creating these scenarios where they're the villain,
Yeah.
And I went into our marriage with pushing back on every step of the way. Like, do not make me like subconsciously like do things that will turn into like self-fulfilled prophecies.
Yeah.
Because it ends up happening, right? Like, if she said like your mother-in-law is going to be this way, now I will find ways to taint my mother-in-law in those ways, right? And I'm not saying that like bad things don't happen to people, that all in-laws are great, or that like there must be something wrong with you if your in-laws are treating you a certain way. I'm very well aware that there's plenty of families that have their differences, and some are very dangerous and some are very toxic. So I'm not saying that. But yeah, so I think it's a very important to kind of like...
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of goes back to like the, our finances video, where a lot of people sort of were like leading with and justifying the notion of hiding money from your spouse, which is very different from separate bank accounts, right? Mm-hmm. I think separate money is different from hidden money. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are like, well, like, men are abusive, so you have to hide money. And I was like, we got married. We trusted each other. Mm-hmm. If you're going into our relationship treating me as this supervillain who is going to take away all your money, take away your rights, do all these other things, right? And I'm not talking about like arranged marriages or things like that. And I'm also not denying the reality that there are a lot of very bad people in this world, right? Mm-hmm. But like if you're going into that relationship and like hiding money is a very obvious sort of thing of the treatment, right? But like if you're hiding money, what else are you doing subconsciously to affect your relationship with your spouse and your in-laws, right? Like, and then how do you think he's going to respond to that, or how do you think she's going to respond to that, right? Like, like if you keep treating me like a villain, I may not turn into a villain, but I'll probably start developing characteristics in response to your treatment that maybe I wouldn't have had if we just sort of trusted each other, right? And again, like I know, like, a ton of people are gonna be like, well, I knew I had a cousin who was like this, or I have this experience, and I don't think there's any minimization of those experiences at all. Like people have these experiences, they're very, very real. But I think going into a relationship, especially one that was based on love, right? Where when we got married, or like when a lot of these people get married, and then you start off with the notion of like, but now I need to hide things from you. Because like, what if, right? I think that's a really, really dangerous thing. And to the other point, I think, is that like, I'm like, my mind's sort of churning now as I'm warming up to this idea, but like, excuse me. I find it really interesting that like the trope, right, of the mother-in-law who teaches her daughter to like take control or whatever, and to like, hey, like your in-laws are not going to like you, they're not going to treat you well, you need to sort of establish dominance. That daughter will eventually have kids, or that mother-in-law may also have her own son. Like, do you not recognize that, like, you're teaching your daughter this, but don't you think that your son's wife will come in with the same mentality?
Yeah.
Right? Do you want that?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that doesn't go away. And then when your son's wife does come in, like, that mother-in-law will more than likely, unfortunately, be the villain that she's teaching her daughter to fight. Right?
Yeah.
Because she's like this sense of authority and dominance, and that father-in-law and all the. So, yeah, I
How
think
do
it's
you
really
feel
weird.
about, there's a lot of, and this happens from like the guy side of the family, right? Like, where there's plenty of mother-in-laws that have some sort of dominance over their son,
Yeah.
right? And there will be like, a far distant cousin who did something terrible, and then all of a sudden, like, the family, like, or like, the idea is that, like, the woman that's going to come into the family is one day just going to, like, pick up their son and move them away, and they're just never going to see their son again. And just creating this, like, narrative, right?
I don't get it. Sorry. I'm so confused.
So I'm saying is, like, there are certain situations where, like, the mother thinks that the daughter-in-law is going to come into the family and just, like, take her son away,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And that comes from, like, he's my son, he's my only son, or whatever it is, right? Like, I have more right over him than you do as his wife.
Yeah.
And then it will be like, you know, even if, like, the woman is doing everything right,
Yes.
and she's not saying or doing anything that remotely hints to the idea that she's one day just going to pick up, cause rifts, or, have the family drift apart, or take the son and move further away into a different country with the kids, and you're never going to see your son again.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like a strong fear for mother-in-laws that have son, like,
Yeah. Yeah. Mothers of sons. Yeah.
and
I think that's the opposite side of the coin of the mother with the daughter, right? It's in very same way. I think the notion of the self-fulfilled prophecy, right? Because, like, this mother-in-law will treat her daughter-in-law as this person who's going to take her son away and rip things away from her. She's not going to trust her. She's going to treat her poorly. And eventually, that daughter-in-law, even if she came in with the best of intentions, even if she came in just with her heart open, her arms open, she's eventually going to start needing to protect herself,
yep,
or wanting to protect herself, and then wanting to protect what she has, as far as her relationship with her husband. So, like, I think that a lot of what goes into prepping people for marriage is more combative than it is sort of teaching people to be
yeah,
good spouses,
yeah,
right? Like I remember the advice my dad gave us when we first got married. I don't know if you remember it.
I
But, like,
remember. He asks me every once in a while if I
he
remember it.
quizzes you.
Yeah, he, like, randomly just will bring it up, and he was just like, "Remember that when you guys got married, what I said to you?" And I'm like, "Mm-hmm." And he's like, "Repeat it to me."
Welcome to my childhood. But yeah, it was the notion of he's like, his really only and primary and slash only advice to us was, don't go into marriage thinking it's a partnership or 50-50. Both of you should always be trying to do more than 100%, right?
Yeah,
And, like, I'm sounding like I'm praising my dad, and I am. I'm praising my parents. I love them and everything they've done. But, like, I wish more people would teach their children those things, right? Like, not that particular
yeah,
piece of advice, even though I think that's great advice, but, like, teach your child to be a good spouse, right? And teach your child to take care of themselves. So, God forbid, if they get a bad spouse, they can take care of themselves, right? Because, like, the other side of it is that, like, all of these women who get terrible husbands, or all these husbands who get terrible wives, and more so, less so with husbands, but definitely more so with women, right? Like, their family system disappears.
yeah,
It's like, oh, my husband's abusive. Chalo beta, hota hai. It's like, what?
yeah.
No,
Oh
man,
God.
pull her out of that, right? Like, why are you teaching her? Like, why are you teaching her to treat her family as villains when you're not going to be the hero she needs.
Yes. Yes. Since we're talking about your dad,
Oh gosh.
I want to talk a little bit about expectations in marriages. This is a really small portion of the.
Okay. I'm scared of my dad watching this one now.
No, I mean it's nothing bad. Like your dad is really sweet. Alhamdulillah, I got really lucky with having such great sets of parents. But it was just really funny. Like when we got married, your dad like literally would not talk to me unless I addressed to him as Papa, and I called them uncle and auntie.
Yeah.
My thing was like, I have a relationship with my mom and dad. Like, my mom and dad are my mom and dad, and then your uncle and auntie. Like, eventually, if I feel right, calling you guys out of love, like this feels naturally to me, and I'll call you guys Papa and Ami when I feel like I can.
Yeah.
And it by no means meant like I didn't love them, I didn't care for them. It was just like I wanted it to be natural.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember I would just like talk to him, and he would just completely ignore me. I would like ask him a question, he's like completely just look somewhere else. Like he's like, and then I would have to say like Papa, and then he would like be like abolo, like say it now, and I would just be like, I used to get so frustrated. I was like, I am trying to have a conversation, and you're making it so much harder for me to have a conversation. But the funny thing was, I said, at least I felt like those expectations weren't the same with your sisters, right? Like one of your sisters like never called her in-laws mom and dad, and I even asked her at the table when this conversation was happening. I was like, hey, like did you call your parent, like your in-laws, like mom and dad? She's like, no, I always called them uncle and auntie.
Yeah.
But it was like even hearing that and knowing that his daughter didn't feel comfortable calling them whatever, or that her in-laws didn't really care for it, it was still like this expectation that I must call him Papa. And then he would also put this, he would also ask Ami to be called Ami.
Yeah.
Like I could not talk to her unless like I called her Ami. So it was just such a weird thing. And I think what I'm trying to say is there's such weird expectations in place for women when they get married into a family. And sometimes the expectations don't apply to their own kids, or let alone their daughters, right?
So what I will say though is that like he did have that expectation of my sister, right?
Yeah.
Her in-laws didn't, right? Like, and we talked about this when it was happening, right? And I had this sort of the same opinion at the time, is that like if you start calling them uncle and auntie, the likelihood that you switch to Ami and Papa at any point is very, very low, right? Because that becomes your term of endearment, is uncle and auntie. And so Papa had that expectation of my sister, but her in-laws didn't have that expectation or that desire. So that never transpired for her.
I think what I understand what you're saying, and I think what I'm trying to say is expectations like that shouldn't be forced.
So again, right? This is, I don't think it should be forced.
Because
sure,
to me,
right?
at that time, it felt like it was forced, right? Like, I'm new into the family. I'm learning ins and out of the family. It's as small as... And some people were like, you should have just called him that. What's the big deal?
Yeah.
Right? But to me, it's like... The labels that I have for people are based off of, like, how naturally or how, drawn I am to them, right?
Yep.
You have to create relationships, and your labels come from that.
Yeah.
And for me, it felt so forced. Like, I have to call him. Otherwise, I can't communicate with him. And that was, like, frustrating.
Yeah.
So I think, like, my take on all of this is that, like, you should have expectations. It's not wrong to have expectations. But I think it is wrong to force those expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get what you're saying, right? I think it was just... And I still sort of stand behind, because, like, I've had family come in, right? Yeah. Or like in-laws come in, where I start off with calling them one thing, right? And then even though our relationship evolves, I start thinking of them as somebody else or something more, right? What I call them never changes, right? And
yeah, but I think that might just be like a thing that you do.
No, I very rarely have seen people change what they call somebody outside of pet names. Right. So I think like early on, like, and I don't think my dad ever did it with malice or like ever tried to.
Oh
I don't
yeah,
think he
no,
ever
I'm
made you
not.
feel bad.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that no, he did
And no,
not.
but what I'm saying is that like I'm sure it made you feel awkward, right? Like I think that felt, even when I tried to call your parents mom and dad, it felt very awkward to me because I've never called anybody mom and dad but my own parents, right? So it definitely felt awkward. But I think that sort of like having that, like now you call them mommy and papa, mommy and papa, and it seems like it comes very naturally to you,
It does, but
right?
that's
But I
something
think
that
that
you
I
know.
think calling them that and then building the relationship with that has made it feel natural as opposed to them becoming endearingly auntie and
Actually,
uncle.
no. I think it was. So I think for the longest time I switched between like I was giving him what he wanted,
Yeah, and then at
but it.
home you would, between us, you would call them auntie and uncle.
But even sometimes, like when my parents were there, I would still call him uncle and auntie
Yeah,
because it was like weird, right? Like my mom and dad are there, but I'm also calling somebody else mom and dad. And it was just like,
yeah,
and I even like when I was just with them, I would still be like uncle,
yeah,
auntie, ami, papa. Like I would just kind of like do that. But then like over time, based off of our relationship and based off of like our experiences, those labels started coming naturally,
yeah.
right?
But I think there's no way of us
Yeah.
proving one way or the other, right? But I
Yeah,
don't think that if the expectation never existed, I don't think you ever would have called them mommy and papa, even as your relationship changed.
I don't think so. I think you would have.
Yeah.
Because I know how I am. But anyways, I think that's just like a gist of,
Yeah.
you know.
But what I will say is that also my dad also had the same expectation of me, was to call your parents.
Well, you do not care about the expectation.
No, I tried. I think the difference was that like you alluded to it earlier, right? Like we didn't get married under the best of circumstances. And so my relationship with your parents didn't evolve for years, right? So when
Yeah.
I started trying to call them mom and dad, I never spoke to them. Even when I tried to, right? Like the conversation never really. So like, who was I going to call mom and dad,
Yeah, I think yes.
right? So it
I
was
think it's
always just
because
auntie and uncle because I was
we're all
referring to them as opposed to talking to
yeah.
them.
But I think it also just comes from like how different our families are and how they
Yeah,
navigate through things, right? We've never
yeah.
been
We have a
like the
freaking logistics group chat where people are
yeah.
messaging on a million times a day, right? But
Yeah, but then like but with us like we rarely talk,
yeah,
like I talk to my mom every day, but like with my siblings and my dad and stuff, like we'll talk like every once in a while.
yeah,
So like, you know, you're healthy, like everybody is fine, like,
yeah,
you know, that's just how they are. But I think like because I'm so much more involved with your family and they're so much involved in our families and obviously in the good ways, it's I'm saying that because somebody's gonna be like, like
yeah. No, it's
she's
just
saying
funny.
SOS.
Blink twice.
I don't even know how to blink twice. I might as well fall asleep. All right, I think we should wrap it up because it's getting a little bit of a long episode, and
Yeah, no. This
we
is what
were
happens when the
told.
kids are asleep.
We were also told on our Instagram, on our
Oh yeah,
comments, please keep it.
We'll keep it shorter. Yeah,
So here we're keeping it short.
yeah. So it was a good
You know,
topic.
it's a great topic, and I think I would love to hear some of your experiences. I guess we can like meet in the comments, talk a little bit,
Yeah.
what it's like for you and how were you groomed, and then we'll see you next time.
Also, just a side note, like the word grooming is like,
Oh my god,
because it also refers to like grooming a child for, so
maybe we can just cut that part out.
how you were groomed. Yeah.
I mean, we
So
can start with my train of thought. I don't know.
yeah.
Okay, cool.
So thanks everybody for watching if you're still here for some reason. And
I am sleepy.
yeah. If you guys would like to hear a topic, leave us in the comment in the section.
That.
All right. Bye.